Hello and welcome to this workshop for ImagineFX. I'm primarily a 3D artist and have been since the early 90s. You may have even followed one of the many tutorials I've created for 3D World magazine over the years. Even with this background in polygons and vertices, I've always had the desire to try more traditional art and get back to my roots. For as long as I can remember, this would be my New Year's resolution. That year would be when I started drawing again, but I never really stuck to it. This was until 2016. This year I was determined to do it and I finally did. I can happily say that I've been drawing and painting ever since. I came up with a plan and followed it through to get me to where I am now. The plan was so successful that I've been asked repeatedly to share it, so I created a video explaining the process. I now regularly paint in my spare time, mainly stylized portraits because that's what I enjoy doing, but it's important to just be creating. Over this time I've experimented with various techniques and brushes to come up with a system that works for me to paint skin, hair and eyes, and I use this with all my portraits. So with this workshop I want to share my process for painting wet skin, while also demonstrating how to blend colours without the use of any fancy tools or brushes. It's important to have your workspace set up before you begin. Let's start with looking at how I have my workspace organised. I have the main canvas in the background and the resolution of this is roughly 4000 pixels high by 3000 pixels wide. On the left I have a floating window with the reference I'm using in it. I always use reference to help guide the lighting and shapes of my portraits. As you will see in this workshop, I never do a direct copy. The reference photo I'm using is of a model called Julia Nowak, and the photographer's name is now on the screen. I apologise, but I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, so I just thought it would be easier just to display it on screen for you. On the right I have the navigator open. This is essential as it's always good to be able to quickly glance up and see how the portrait is working as a whole. Finally, at the bottom left I have my brushes. These are just a few of the ones I use all the time, and you can download these as part of the workshop. To begin, use the reference and create a basic sketch. Start with some rough lines on a new layer just to get the general feel for the proportions and composition. As you can see, I like to play around with the character and add my own style. Add another layer and reduce the opacity of the previous one. Now refine the sketch, tightening up the lines and cleaning it up. Repeat this as necessary until you have a sketch you're happy to start working with. This portrait has a black background, which won't work with the current sketch, so quickly invert it to make it white. Time to start painting. Create a new layer and then with a hard brush, fill in the head area with a mid-tone skin colour. Add another layer now and holding Alt, select the layer you just filled in. This will create a clipping mask, restricting everything you paint to those pixels on the previous layer. Switch to the soft speckle brush now and using a lighter colour, start to roughly block in the lighter areas of the skin. Next, switch to a darker tone and start to work those in too. This is really rough at this stage, so don't get bogged down with details. Reduce the brush size and start to add some of the smaller, darker areas, like inside the ear. Also work in the side of the face that's in shadow, around her nose and lips. Move up to the eye next and add the darker areas around her eyelids. Switch back to the larger brush and work in some colour variation. Check the reference to help guide you, so add more of an orange tone around the face and some red to her nose. You're starting to build up the volumes of the face now, but you can push them further. Choose a lighter colour next and brighten up the areas which catch the light. Now you have a good foundation to build upon, it's time to start looking at adding some basic details and defining some of the features. Switch to the hard brush and block in the area under her right eye, and where the light catches her eyelid. You can be liberal with this step, so don't be afraid to add more than you need. The goal is to maintain the line under the lower eyelid. Select the eraser next and using a soft speckle brush, begin to pull some of the strokes back, gently softening and blending into the face. If you're not sure how far to go, check the navigator. You can always go further than you think. Next, lighten the area above her lips and then use the eraser to blend it in. Move up to the cheekbone next and follow the same process. So this is how I do all my blending. I don't use mixer brushes or smudge tools, I simply add and subtract. Out of my brushes, I think the soft speckled is my all-time favourite. I use it most of the time. Continue now working on the eyelids to tighten up the details. Remember to stay aware of changes in colour, so make the inner eyelids more pink. You can also use a hard tapered brush now for this sharper line work. You can also use this opportunity to experiment with other colours you can see in the photo. Next, switch to the nose, adding more definition with the shadows. Now it's time to flip the canvas. You should get into the habit of doing this as frequently as you can, or if you get to a stage when you're not sure what to work on next. Doing this will highlight proportion issues as well as contrast and tone problems. In this case, it looks like we need to push the lighter areas more. So just as you did before, start to block out with a lighter skin tone. And then pull back with the eraser, blending it back into the face. It's at this stage that you might want to work on the eyes. This will help you visualise the eyelids and get a better feel for how the area is shaping up. That's looking better, and we can now see we need more pink under the eye. Make sure you are always glancing at the navigator to make sure the tones are correct. Seeing things from a distance can help balance the portrait. You may want to quickly add in the remaining features, so the lips and the rest of the eyes. One tip is to keep the iris part of the eye separate. I find that I'm always adjusting the position of these as I work, so it makes sense to keep them on a separate layer. When I have the main iris painted, I add a mask to it, and then that allows me to erase parts of the iris which would be hidden underneath the eyelids. Again, this then makes it future-proof, because if I end up moving the iris later on, I've not actually deleted any of the painting. The eyebrows are just placeholder for now. Having them in will let us be a bit more accurate with the shading on the brow. Let's flip back now. I can see in the navigator that we need more contrast, so push the highlights further, this time using white. The highlights are what bring the skin to life. They also help to portray the water resting on its surface. Checking the reference, I can see the side of the face which is in shadow needs more of a blue tint to it, so add that next. Remember to use a clipping mask to make adding it easier. There's still lots to do on the face, but to get the jaw to look right, you should now take a break from the head and block out the body. Don't be afraid to use the liquify tool to adjust the proportions. Adding the eyelashes will help to make the eyes feel more complete. Remove the placeholder eyebrows next and paint in the final version. From here, it's just a case of repeating the process, so you're effectively building up layers and adding more depth and definition to the skin. The ear needs more contrast, so enhance that next. Overall, the skin is looking a little flat, so add some texture to it next. Select the Skin Texture Speckled brush and using white, start to add the detail to areas where the light catches her face. Don't worry if you go too far, you can always pull it back with the eraser as you have been doing so far. Feel free to experiment with the other skin brushes to get the right look for you. You need to now add more colour variation, so create a new layer and set the blending mode to colour. Add some purple or maybe more lilac under the eyes. And some green around the face. Again, let the reference guide you. You will notice I don't have a lot of layers. I try to merge my edits into the main layer when I'm happy. This not only keeps the scene tidier, but it also makes it easier to edit. Let's move back to the body now and work on that. Just do exactly the same as you did with the face, adding different tones and using the eraser to blend them in. Don't forget the highlights, it's those that bring the skin to life. Also remember those colour variations, so add green, red and blue into the body too. Even if it's subtle, you will still see it. Remember to check the navigator just to see how things are balancing out. Again, this needs more colour. Let's add pink under the eyes and cheeks first. Let's also try some green. Just experiment and see what works and what doesn't. For the water drops, use the hard brush and create the main trails using white. Change the blending mode to soft light so it blends better with the skin. Use an eraser initially to remove some of the areas where the trails need to be darker. Now create a new layer and add it as a clipping mask, restricting everything to the trails. You can now start to add some of the shadows around the trails to give them some depth. But don't go too far, remember these trails are going to be pretty much flat against the skin. Create another clipping mask and this time use it to enhance the highlights. Finally, use another layer to add in the droplets. Things looking good, but we can't get a good feel for the head as a whole until her hair is added. So block that in next. This workshop is focused more on the skin, so I won't go into detail about her hair. I do have a full hair painting tutorial available at my QBrush store if you're interested. So that's the last main element in now. So we can go over her as a whole, adding the shadows on her body and her scalp. Just again to help balance things out and bring everything together. At this stage you could look at her and say she's done. I see this, however, as just the first stage. From here I like to take a break for a few days and come back to her with fresh eyes. I then repeat everything again. I go over each element one by one, so that's the skin, the eyes, the lips, the nose, the hair, the body, enhancing them, adjusting the colours, adjusting the tones, playing around with the highlights and the shadows, just to get everything balanced out until I'm happy with where we are with the portrait. Just remember as you're working, keep flipping the canvas, just so you can get to see her from a different perspective. So there, we've come to the end of this workshop. I hope you've enjoyed it, I hope you've learnt something. If you have enjoyed it, please let me know. If you'd like to see more of my work, then please check out my Instagram account. Alternatively, if you'd like to see more of my tutorials, then please head on over and subscribe to my YouTube channel. This is antCGi signing off. Thanks for watching and I will see you on the next one.